Changeworking. Moving minds for change that lasts.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Changeworking, a show for practitioners and coaches who help their clients create change. My name is Ruckus, and as always, I'll be in conversation with James Tripp. Last episode about clean language was very popular, and so I thought we'd build off of that by talking about some of James's lesser-known influences. We ended up talking about so many that I'm going to break this up into 2 episodes. In this first one, we're going to cover 3 principles, choice theory, and impact therapy. So here's my conversation with James about those 3 influences.
3 principles.
3 principles is, let me just back up to NLP for a moment.
Okay.
One of the ideas in NLP that comes in from general semantics, which may be on the list of things that I've mentioned, is the idea of the map is not the territory. Now, this is one of the presuppositions of NLP. Anyone goes to an NLP practitioner training, they probably cover that day one early on. And they dive into it and then they kind of move on, right? The map is not the territory. What it's really saying is the world as it is not the world as we make it up to be. We live in a world of models of the actual world. And there's always this intermediary. So this is an idea that I've sometimes called the first transformative truth. We can't really liberate ourselves from our rendering of reality until we know that it's a rendering of reality and not reality itself. But people tend to skip over it on NLP, or they think they get it or whatever. In a sense, 3 principles is specializing in really getting people to have a deep understanding that their experience of the world is not the world as it is. So when they get caught up in all sorts of ideas, particularly painful ideas that would take them away from their well-being, they can think that they're living in the world, but they're not. They're living in a kind of mind-made illusion. So 3 principles really focuses on us being able to recognize that our thinking is always going on. It's always shaping our experience, that our thoughts are simply thoughts and not facts. They're not realities. They're not truths. And then when we recognize this, when we come to recognize the nature of thought, and this is something that 3 principles is particularly interested in, it's this idea, Byron Katie puts it like this: you cannot let go of a thought, but when you see it for what it is, it will let go of you. So when you come to see the nature of how your thoughts, how your mind creates your experience, and particularly your suffering, when you come to see the nature of it, you're able to take it all a lot less seriously and just kind of fall out of those thoughts, or let fall away and fall back into a fulfilling being. So it's a kind of path of freedom. I would sometimes call it a black path approach, a path of liberation from the torments of our mind. And it has some particular biases. So one of the things that 3 principles claims is that they have no techniques, that there are no methods, there's nothing, there's just a conversation that points you in the direction of a truth. And when you see this truth is liberating profoundly. And I think there's something to be said for that. Of course, you could argue that they are using techniques in the conversation all the time. They are using, gambits, as I might call it, in different devices, different metaphors to get people to get into this truth. The importance is as well that this is an experienced truth, right? This truth of like, my mind is creating an artificial reality. This is something to really know, not something to intellectually, something to know experientially. So it's a lot of people get the concept. They go, I get that, but I'm still feeling upset in these situations. Then you don't get it the way the 3 principles talks about. The idea is not just that you understand this intellectually, it's that you can really see it in those moments of your life that count, So that's really the essence of it. I learned a lot from it, partly in terms of development, in terms of releasing a personal neurosis, you could say. So it's very profound on a personal level for me, and it's extremely useful with clients. And it actually helped me to sort of understand some of what Milton Erickson was doing better, because I think there's a huge overlap. So the 3 principles, let me just say, are mind, thought, and consciousness, right? So thought is thinking, is your busy mind, it's your kind of left hemisphere machinations. Erickson would equate this with your conscious mind. Right, it's a slightly different rendering of the similar idea. mind, Erickson would probably equate with your unconscious mind. Though in the three principles, it's big mind. It's the mind that goes beyond your personal mind. Right? So when you fall out of your thinking, you're falling out of that kind of personal mind and into big mind, expansive mind, the field, the source, the whatever. And consciousness is really just this thing that brings to life whatever it is that your thoughts are creating and turns them into the experience that you're having, that model. So the aim of the three principles, the consciousness bit doesn't come into it that much in a practical sense. It's recognizing the nature of thought, how your processing creates your experience, being able to see the nature of that. And as you see it, you fall out of it and into this more expanded mind, this mind that is not personal, that goes beyond. So for me, that really helped. There's a lot of parallels with what Erickson was doing. The difference, I'd say, is that Erickson's rendering of your unconscious mind is a more personal unconscious mind, whereas like the mind of three principles, the assumption is that it is transcendent of self.
When you say three principles, you said it so many times that I went and tried to look it up on my own. Are you speaking about as presented by Sydney Banks?
Yes. So comes from the insight or a kind of awakening moment of a guy called Sydney Banks. And as legend has it, he was a Scottish welder by profession, but he emigrated to Canada and was working in a paper mill. And the story goes, he was not an educated guy. He didn't have any kind of higher education or anything like that. It's just a kind of very practical, pragmatic man who didn't even read very much. But at some point in the sort of early mid-70s, I'm not sure of the exact dates, his wife took him to a couples retreat where there were sort of psychotherapists and counselors doing all group couples counseling, because she obviously thought their marriage needed working on somehow. And Sydney wasn't really up for this at all. He's just, this is a load of old nonsense. So during one of the sessions, he'd snuck out to have a cigarette with somebody else who was on the course, another one of the husbands, and they were talking, and supposedly this guy was going on about how insecure he was in his relationship. And Sid was listening to this guy and said, "Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm insecure too." And the guy laughed at him and said, "Sid, you're not insecure. You just think you are." Now, it's a throwaway line, but for some reason, maybe it was the timing, the alignment of the stars, who knows what, it landed in a very particular way with Sid Banks, where he thought, what if that's true? What if I just think that I am? What if it's all just my thinking? And he had this epiphany in the moment, which just absolutely blew open his whole sense of reality. And supposedly the change in him was huge and significant and profound. And he went from being quite a kind of uptight, angry guy to being super mellow, super chilled out. And all sorts of people in his life noticed this huge difference and started going, wow, what's going on? And he was so at peace that people started coming to him. And he began to try to explain to them what it was that he saw now that was different from before, what he'd come to realize. And this is how these conversations started. So Sid started having conversations, and people would be with Sid, and they would start to experience a shift in their experience of self and how they are in the world, and they would become much more at peace, much more grounded. They would connect with their well-being, and they're like, this is great. And then they went out to have further and further conversations. Now, early on, it wasn't called the Three Principles. It went through a number of different names. At one point, it was called Health Realization. At one point, it was called Psychology of Mind. And one of the most famous practitioners of the Three Principles, before it was called Three Principles, is a guy called Richard Carlson. And he had a sort of best-selling book called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, that many people have heard of. The subtitle is And It's All Small Stuff. That's actually his kind of most loose book. It's not a great book, even though it's his most famous book. I really like his books. You Can Be Happy No Matter What, Stop Thinking, Start Living. I really like those. Slowing Down to the Speed of Life, which he wrote with a guy called Joseph Bailey, I think. That's the guy's name. But over time, there's been many people were influenced by Sid Banks, George Pransky, Jack Pransky, lots and lots of people. And they became a certain sort of practitioner. And the work is done through a conversation. And it's a conversation to to show somebody something that points in a particular direction, that shows them the illusory nature of thought, that their well-being sits underneath, and that is their true kind of home. It's the place they can return to when they free themselves from the thinking that's been keeping them from it.
Well, here's the part, and I hope you can fill this gap in for me. I watched some videos of Sydney Banks talk about the 3 principles. He said what they are, and he said, that's it. Anything beyond that, you're making it more complicated. And that was all he's trying to share. So he shared those ideas, sounds like a philosophy. So I don't understand how that is a modality that someone practices with a client.
Right. So I think, now you might argue, well, is it a modality that somebody practices with a client? Maybe if you go back to the older people, they sat with Sid, they had an ongoing conversation, and he did his best to be, I guess, flexible and adaptive in bringing them to seeing what he wanted them to see. And then those people have gone on, they've sort of done it themselves. And then those people have spawned other practitioners. And what you get is you get people who have a particular way of seeing things, and usually a particular way and manner of communicating. So a lot of the good 3P coaches, they're actually really good at shifting state and connecting into that state themselves. So there's an element of that going on, whether they're conscious of it or not. That many of them are extraordinarily good conversational hypnotists. This is the interesting thing, looking at it from an NLP perspective, is you can go, wow, you can learn a lot about conversational hypnosis from these people. So they're deploying all sorts of metaphors, thought experiments, maneuvers, gambits, all sorts of things in these conversations they have. So now, some people will take a very organic approach to this. They'll get into the 3 principles, they'll immerse themselves in that world, and they'll just start having conversations with people. It's almost like a kind of evangelizing. But they tend to be well calibrated to people's state and their ground of being, because that's what they're looking to get a shift in. But then you've got other people like my friend Jamie Smart, like Michael Neal. You get some people who are quite big names in the NLP world. So Michael Neal was a big name in the NLP world. He used to co-train with Richard Bandler. He ghost wrote a lot of Paul McKenna's old books. And then he had this kind of experience with 3 principles and completely shifted tack and went full on into that world. So you get people who have actually come in. There's a few people, particularly Michael Neal and Jamie Smart, I would say, who have come in from this kind of NLP, Ericksonian hypnosis background, but then sort of embraced the principles. And of course, they didn't lose their skills from NLP and Ericksonian hypnosis. And I want to be careful about saying this because I want to be absolutely clear that I'm right in saying this, and I might not be. But Jamie said to me recently that he returns some degree in teaching some of the NLP communication stuff because he found that people who'd learnt that were more effective at getting people to connect with what he wants to get them to connect with when he's having a kind of 3 principles conversation. So there's a recognition there that some skill in how you run the conversation is valuable. But not all 3 principles practitioners come from that background, so they won't think about it in that more strategic sort of way that perhaps NLP as well.
If someone's interested in this, I mean, I can go find an NLP training. I can find a hypnosis training. Is there a 3 principles training, like an official one, or is it just?
There's not really necessarily any official training. So my friend Jamie Smart, he does his clarity practitioner trainings. He'll probably thank me for mentioning that. So he does those trainings. That's his take on it. But there's also the kind of old school 3P people who are not actually, there's quite a lot of people that are quite disapproving of any sort of monetization of the principles. And Jamie's business is based around the 3 principles. I'm not saying it's all about the money for him. He's a business guy, but he's absolutely all in with the principles and adherent and wants to bring those to the world. But a lot of old school practitioners, they don't really charge anything. I think George Pransky would charge people based on a percentage of their income. So it was always like a means tested thing. So it's not really that kind of thing. Best, if you wanted to get into 3 principles, you'll find there are people that run seminars on it. There should be some open trainings. There's some names in that world. Dickon Bettinger, he kind of runs trainings and seminars. Elsie Spittle, who was a friend of Sid Banks before he had the epiphany. So she saw the change and she got poured in. She's still out there doing stuff. So people can find trainings like that. You can probably find some people that will do individual one-on-one sessions, because the idea is you don't learn to do it to people. You go there, you go and make that shift, right? You don't get to go, oh, I don't really get this, but I'm going to use this with other people. You can't point to what you haven't seen, is the way they might see it. So you need to go through the process or see what it is that you're pointing people towards. And there are books aplenty. Now, I think there's upsides and downsides to books. And I said this to Jamie last time I saw him. I said, do you not think that a lot of the skill of the Three Principles conversations is in your ability to connect in with people, create a mutual resonance, shift state? And it's not really about the ideas or the principles themselves, more about like a kind of resonance. And he's like, Jamie went, well, not really, which I love the way he disagrees when he does. And Jamie's point was, look, people have read my book. They've read the print copy of my book, and it's changed everything. And so it can't be all about the nonverbal qualities and all of that, which is a fair point. So Jamie's book is Clarity. I mean, he's my friend, so maybe I've got a bias towards that. And I think it's a good book. And I think particularly if people are trained in NLP and that kind of thing, that was Jamie's first book. He's also got another book that he's done called Results, which I've never read, but Clarity was good. Yeah, so books, that kind of thing. A lot of it for me is, I was curious about Three Principles to start with because of Jamie. I knew Jamie when he was an NLP guy, and he was like respected NLP trainer in the UK and skilled, and I would give him kudos for doing things a lot of other NLP trainers wouldn't do, like demonstrating actual change work with sleight of mouth. So he's a skilled NLP guy with a good reputation, and he sold his entire NLP business and walked away from it to do this Three Principles stuff. And at the time I was like, what? That's nuts. What on earth is that? And he did this event called If the Secret's So Great, Where's My Ferrari? And this was his first kind of outing talking about the Three Principles. And I went to that and I was like, yeah, this stuff actually kind of really makes sense for me. And it was sort of a useful seminar and I got some changes from it, but I didn't dive in. I carried on my NLP path and hypnosis path. And then a few years later, I went to another event that Jamie put on in London, and I'd done a bit of research on Three Principles, and I thought that I understood it. I really thought that I got it, because I did intellectually, right? And I'm like, yeah, I get this stuff. I understand. And I sort of modeled how some of the practitioners work. And I was like, yeah, I know how this is done. So I went to this event that Jamie put on, and he called me up as a demo subject and was doing this thing on it. And I was talking and saying, this is the case, and this is the case. And then I thought, I know where he's going to go next. I know what his next move's going to be. He's going to tell me it's all just my thinking. And I said, yeah, and I know this is all just my thinking, but... And he said, well, can I stop you right there? I said, yes. Yeah, you can. He said, I'm just going to challenge you on that. And I know you say in this moment that you know that this is all just your thinking. But I'm going to suggest that you really don't. Right. And just when he said this, I had this little mind shift, and I thought, my God, he's right. I don't. I was completely caught up in my mind-made reality and trying to head him off at the pass. But I realized that whilst I got it intellectually in that moment, I wasn't seeing it. I was oblivious to it, even though consciously and intellectually I got it. And I got this kind of shift. And then off the back of that training, Jamie basically said to everybody who was on that training, if you want a free call, I'll give you a little bit of one-on-one coaching over this. And it wasn't supposed to be more than like a half an hour call, I think. But I think we ended up doing an hour or so. He ended up doing another 4 or 5 calls with me. And we met once in person where he just kind of coached me on this stuff. But some of the sessions, I got some really powerful shifts in it. And I was like, there's something richer and deeper to this than I hadn't seen before. So I did this kind of 4 or 5 sessions, and then I did a deeper dive. And for a while, I kind of became an almost exclusively 3P-based coach and changework practitioner. For a period of about a year, I was like, this is just great. It's so powerful when you get people to get the shifts. I could use all my NLP skills and all of this. I just knew where I was going. It's like this one solution for everything. And I really sort of valued it, and I got some incredible results with clients. I know one day I had this client come in and he hired me for 6 months coaching. I'm like, yeah, we're going to do the 3P stuff. It's going to blow his mind and everything. I didn't check in enough ahead of time with him. And he came to me, he said, oh, I've done Michael Neal's training and I've done Jamie Smart's Clarity practitioner. And I'm like, oh. I suddenly thought, and it hadn't made any difference for him. Just hadn't had any impact at all. And I was just completely thrown by this. Just booked the guy for 6 months coaching where I'm planning to use this paradigm, which in my opinion at the time, two of the best in the field had failed to make a dent with him with it. And I was like, oh. So I said to this guy, I said, look, I kind of work from this place, right? He said, yeah. And I said, well, so why are you here? He said, well, there's something about the way you communicate that really resonates for me and all of that. So I thought, okay, I'll do my best. I too did 6 months coaching with him, and I felt like we didn't make a dent with it, didn't scratch the surface. And I thought, oh, well, that's kind of blown my belief that I've come across the answer to everything. This is all I need, changework-wise. So around about that time, I left the country and went traveling for a year. And I got a copy of Bessel van der Kolk's book, When the Body Keeps the Score, which I actually quite like, but I happen to find the book useful and I take some of it with a pinch of salt. But this book, When the Body Keeps the Score, is about trauma, basically a book about trauma. And as I read this book, it occurred to me that there were some signature patterns in this client that were like textbook traumatization stuff, trauma in the background stuff, right? Textbook. And I was like, oh, and throughout the coaching that I've been doing with this guy, he kept every time I'd suggest things, he'd get really activated, his threat response systems would go off. Sometimes he'd get really angry with me, start shouting at me, and he was really kind of volatile, this guy was. So we went through this process. But when I got back, I called him up. I'd been away for nearly a year. I called him up and I said, oh, it's James. I said, we did that coaching. And, the honest truth is I didn't feel like we really made too much impact with it. And he said, no, I agree. We didn't make too much impact. I said, look, if you'd like to, I'd like to invite you to come along and do a little bit of a couple of sessions with me. I'm just free of charge because I've got a different take on how we might approach this. And he agreed to come and do the free sessions. Now, what I did in these free sessions is I did with him David Grove's trauma reprocessing, metaphor-based trauma reprocessing process, because that's what I knew how to deal with quote-unquote trauma. And I knew this from way back, and I'd never really used it that much, but I knew I had it. This is what I had in terms of tools for quote-unquote trauma. And I think that we got way more shifts in a couple of sessions of this than I did in 6 months of 3 principles, right? So some people listening to this might go, oh, so is the Grovian trauma stuff better than 3 principles? No, it's not. It's just different. What it had me come to realize is I still value the 3 principles stuff immensely. But as soon as you get yourself caught up in one paradigm thinking you've got the answer, you are excluding a whole bunch of people that may otherwise benefit from being able to work with you. So there isn't one size that fits all. There isn't one thing that's good for everybody. So I kind of moved back at that point to being a little bit more of an eclecticist again. I shifted into doing more kind of memory reconsolidation work, that kind of thing, which has been a big part of what I do since. And now 3 principles purists would say, well, these are mutually exclusive paradigms, this trauma stuff, and they're not really. You can make them sit together. You can make anything sit together and interweave. So there's still a lot of sensibilities in my work from 3 principles. It's not gone away. It's still there in the gaps. And in some sessions, we'll go more in that direction. But yeah, very valuable stuff. And it was very, very valuable to me personally. I think I often say to people, if people go back across my YouTube channel and listen to my voice and how it's changed, you will hear that I'm a lot less grounded, less in my body, and much more kind of up in my sort of thoughts and management. You can hear it in how my voice is and how resonant it is. And a lot of that I put down to 3 principles and the kind of more grounding and groundedness, and the less reactivity I had and less need to micromanage how I came across or my experience and all of that kind of thing. So for me, still, I'm not an all-in adherent, but 3 principles is an incredibly valuable paradigm.
Just a side note, you'd mentioned it so many times that I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go look. And it was incredibly difficult for me to find anything that explained it well. Sydney Banks didn't write a book like, here's the 3 principles. He wrote these metaphor storybooks. There's not a like, here's the 3 principles manual, or here's the introduction to 3 principles.
It's going to be the best bet, I think, entry point, I will say, is Jamie's book, Clarity.
Oh, okay. Because like I said, I found Sydney Banks like, here are the 3 things, that's the end of it. Anything beyond that is just making it more confusing than it needs to be.
Yeah.
And I was like, how is there an entire industry around 3 principles if that's what he starts and stops at?
Because it's not about information. I think that's what he's trying to say in the end. It's like, look, I can give you a bit of a framework, but, you know, I don't know. I mean, I never met Sydney Banks, but apparently people would just sit with him. He would talk. They would change.
Yeah. Huh.
You know, he didn't have anything specific that he was going to say. I'll tell you, there's a really interesting book called Modality by Jack Pransky. And one of our Client Shifts Academy members was referring to this book to me the other day, saying, like, of all the 3 principles books, because they got into 3 principles because I talked about it. The 2 books that made the biggest difference to them was Modality by Jack Pransky and Jamie Smart's book, Clarity. Now, Modality is really interesting because it's about how some people went into a South Florida housing project that was just rife with crime and drugs and all of this kind of thing, completely turned the whole community around just by having 3 principles conversations. And it's a documentation, so to speak, of that project to turn those projects around. What a difference it can make in a kind of community setting. So that's by Jack Pransky. So that's a very interesting book to go, get a sense of what's possible here on a grander, more kind of social scale. So instead of thinking about, this is just some kind of therapy or change work thing. It's quasi-religious, you could say. I mean, when I say quasi-religious, I don't mean that as in actual religious. I remember my friend, the amusing Scottish hypnotist Bob Burns, saying, I don't know anything about these 3 principles people, but I get the impression they all have shiny eyes, he said. There is something a bit like a kind of cult vibe to it. And somebody once referred to 3 principles as Sydney Banks' psychological MDMA. Right. And I think that's actually quite a good description, because one of the things about the 3 principles people, a lot of people in that world are really kind of like loved up and blissed out, but like in a real honest way, not necessarily in that kind of like, yeah, we're faking this or putting it on. They kind of really are. A lot of them are really nice people and genuinely grounded people because they're very much unhooked from their ego. It's quite different from the NLP world, which I love. The NLP world I love, but you get a lot of egos in there. That seems to be way less the case in the 3 principles world. So I do think it is genuinely successful in unhooking people from their ego.
Choice theory.
William Glasser, choice theory again, he was friends with Ellis and they actually got on really well. And I think they only met much, much later in life when they were both quite old. And they respected each other's work greatly. So there's a book called Counseling with Choice Theory, which, whether you get into choice theory or not, is a great book if you're a changework practitioner, because it's just a bunch of transcripts, or not even transcripts, there's storifications of his work with particular clients. And he's saying what he did, why he did it, but in this very much a more, here's this kind of story of my work with this client, not let's go in with the dry theory. I quite like reading that as a practitioner myself, because I get to compare and contrast with what choices I might have made at that particular juncture in the session,
right,
or whatever. So I really like that book. Choice theory is really, it's about finding where you have choice. That's it. In a nutshell. There's other elements to it. He's got these kind of side things about that everybody has what they would call a quality world, the things they need in their life to have a good quality life, all of that. That's probably fine, but it's never the bit that really impacted upon me. What impacted upon me is just this ownership of choice, this ownership of where do we have power. And there's a distinction. This doesn't come from choice theory directly, but it's inspired by it. So I like to think in terms of distinctions because of my old coach, Steve Chandler, of what I call circumstances versus choice. So in any set of circumstances, whatever they are, there is always choice, right? And if you look for the choice in circumstances, it's like, where do I have power here? Now, a lot of people will sort habitually for where they do not have power. I can't do this because of this. I try to do it every time, and they're caught up in every obstacle, every barrier, because that's what they've brought into the foreground. But really, it's like, well, what is the choice that you have? So it's about choice. It's about making a commitment to action. It's about finding out where you can move the needle, let's say. So I really like this. And the area that's been of most influence to me is when I work with couples. So I sometimes find myself working with couples. I'm not a couples counselor. It's just if you do change work, oftentimes, couples issues will come in. I will often invite the person to come back and bring their spouse into the session if the spouse is open to it. So I end up doing couples work sometimes for this reason. Now, when couples are not getting on, there is something that is always present, and I have never seen it not be present, and it is this. The problem with the relationship is that my spouse does this all the time, and then doesn't do this and doesn't and does and doesn't. And the spouse is, yeah, but you do this and don't do this. And how am I supposed to do this when you... So there's this blame game going on, right? Our relationship is screwed up because of you. No, it's screwed up because of you. No, it's because of you. It's because of you. So both of them are blaming the other one for the problems in the relationship. Right? This is standard fare. And if only the other one would fix their wrong ways, then, everything would be fine. So you get the couple, they're both victimized by each other, let's say, in their imaginations, in their minds. So the choice theory takes a really interesting approach to working with couples, and it is simply this. First of all, you recognize there are three entities here. There's you, there's the other person, and there's the relationship. So it's now no longer just two of you, me and you, and who's right and who's wrong. It's like it's me and you and the relationship. So in a sort of choice theory approach to couples work, you're going to start out, you're going to go, look, is either of you sure you're out of this relationship and it's done and it's broken, or is there something here that you want to save? Right? Is there something here that you value, something here that makes you say, I want to give this a go? So Glasser will always, when he's doing couples work, if one of the parties is like, no, I'm done with this relationship, it's screwed up, I'm out of here, there's no work to be done. Because you respect that person's choice. That is their choice. They are living at the level of choice. Their choice is to leave. But if their choice is to stay, then the next question is, okay, given that you want to stay, are you interested in having the best possible relationship that you can have? Now, you want to get a buy-in and a yes. So we're looking at this third entity, the relationship at this point. And then it just becomes a question of what can each of you do to contribute to this relationship, right? What's something you could do that you would feel would be a contribution to this relationship, right? To the improvement of this relationship. And then it becomes about coming up with creative ideas. Now, inside of this kind of framework, what is absolutely banned is blaming, and it's your fault and me versus you. Because you acknowledge that you can't control the other person. You can't make them be a certain way, and you don't have any right to. So the question is, what would you like to contribute that would improve the quality of the relationship? Now, when both parties become on board for contributing thoughts, ideas, whatever it will be, then that starts to turn things around and productive ideas start to come in. Now, there's an idea that he has as well, which he calls the solving circle, which is as soon as you get into an argument, you stop arguing and get in an imaginary solving circle. And there are particular rules of engagement inside of the solving circle, which is no blaming, right? That's the main thing is no blaming, no finger pointing, no bashing each other. So in the solving circle, you are now in, okay, what could each one of us do? I think what I could do is I could do a little bit more of this. How would that be for you? Yeah, I'd like that. What might you do? I could do a little bit more of this. So it's just kind of coming to this point of choice. What do we choose to do? Where do we have choice? That's not choice theory. That's just what I got from choice theory that is of value to me. It fits with some other ideas. So my old coach, Steve Chandler, used to talk about living at the level of choice. And I remember Steve saying to me, and I've said this elsewhere, in a very early coaching session I had with him, he said, James, stop identifying with your history. Stop identifying with your personality. Stop identifying with what you think you can and cannot do, and start identifying with the I that chooses. And when Steve said that to me, it was just like, wow, that was a huge mind shift for me. Is like identifying with the I that chooses. And this idea of in life, if you always look for where you have choice, if you always seek out choice, however small, choice great or small, it will empower you. I have a little story here that fits with this.
Okay.
I had this client, this is probably 10 years ago now, but he came to me because he was in a complete mess. He was having panic attacks all over the place about all sorts of things. And it very quickly became apparent. Now, initially, it was about a fear of flying. This was the issue, a fear of flying. But it became very apparent very quickly that things were not going well in his marriage. And I said, look, if you would like to come in with your wife, I'd be happy to work with both of you. I think this might be a good idea, but, run it past her, see what she says. He got back to me. He said, yes, she's up for doing this. I said, oh, do you mind if I have a conversation with her? And would she be happy to have a conversation separately and we can just establish this? Anyway, we were still in the arrangements of this. And then she decided she was going to leave him. So my theory is he had a sense this was coming, and this was what was leading to him upping this panic, and this upset and panic was coming through. Anyway, she was going to leave him. And I spoke to her on the telephone. She said, look, there's no point us doing the session. I'm leaving him. I said, I 100% respect that decision, and I have no interest in attempting to convince you otherwise. But unless I'm very much mistaken, you are going to have some kind of relationship going forward because you've got kids together. And she said, yes. And I said, so given that you are going to have some kind of relationship, would you be interested in us still perhaps getting together, doing some work, and finding out what that relationship might be, if it's going to be the best relationship you can have, that is the kind of relationship you want? I'm not talking about getting back, but, a kind of quality co-parenting relationship. She said, yes, that sounds like a good idea. I'd like to do that. So they came in for the session, and at the time, I used to have these 2 Lorenzo leather sofas in my room, and it was super cool. My consulting room was. It was genuinely cool. These 2 sofas would be opposite, and I'd sit on one sofa. The client would normally sit on the other, but there's 2 clients here, and they sat on opposite ends of the sofa. And she had her arms crossed. Her body was upright. She had a very fixed jaw, and she was just staring off with her chin up. And she had a posture I can best describe as resolute. Here was somebody she's made up her mind. She knows what she's doing. She's clear. And he, on the other hand, is literally hanging over like a wet dishcloth, hanging over the other arm of the sofa, sobbing, tears, snot, everything coming down, right? And he is just distraught. He's in a state. And I start talking to them, and I'm like, right, I got to get this together. And I start talking about choice. I start riffing on the theme of choice. And I've been going on, I don't know for how long, on this theme of choice, because I want to bring this frame in, this choice theory frame. And he suddenly wails. He says, I don't have any choice, he said. And I said to him, and yet you chose to be here today. Now, this was incredibly interesting, this moment. And I remember it to this day for this reason, because he was hungover the edge of the sofa, sobbing, crying. And suddenly his motion changed and the sobs slowed down a little bit. And suddenly he sat bolt upright, sniffed, wiped the snot from his nose, and went, "All right, let's do this." And it was such a huge change in state. And all I did was connect him with the eye that chooses. I didn't force him to it. I didn't do magic on him. I didn't mind control him. But I said the right thing in the right moment. And the shift was incredible. Now, we did some resourceful work, and she didn't leave. She stayed in the house. That wasn't because anyone had persuaded her to stay, and it wasn't like the marriage got magically remedied. But everything was good. And then I carried on working with him on his own around his anxiety that alleviated. I did a lot of 3 principles work with him. And he became very, very calm, very, very clear, until after about 6-8 months, she suggested they go on holiday together, and he was going to get on a plane. And then that set off his, which was ironically or aptly, I don't know, the thing that he'd originally come to me for.
Right.
And then he collapsed back into panic. And I remember him saying to me, he said, it was all a lie. He said, I thought that I was like confident and all of that, but this is the real me, the panicking self. And I just said to him, how do you know that this isn't the lie? And what you've been experiencing for the last 6 months isn't the real truth of who you are and how you are underneath all of this. And again, I got him back on track after that with a more kind of 3 principles approach. I don't know where he is now. That was 10 years ago. I don't know whether ultimately they stayed together in the long run. But just a little kind of anecdote that touches on that idea of choice and choice theory, and why I think choice can be, when people connect with it, such an incredibly powerful asset or resource or just place to stand psychologically.
Impact therapy.
I don't know too much about the history of this. Ed Jacobs is just a guy who's a worker, right? He's out there working. I think he does a lot more counseling work with troubled youths and these sorts of things. So a lot of his clients are people that he doesn't have a lot of time with. So it's, again, a kind of brief therapy thing. It's not like a paradigm of therapy. It's not like, oh, here's our model for how people work. Part of his approach is use any models that work for you. I've got models that I like. Don't be bound. So it's like an eclectic approach. You can use any models that work for you. So impact therapy is more just this idea that you got to have impact, right? That's it. If your session is boring, uninteresting, unfocused, just doesn't take the client outside of their everyday thinking or reality, it's not going to work. So impact therapy is just a series of ideas, tips. It's a framework for increasing the amount of impact you have, regardless of what models you may be working with. He advocates sort of models as being ones that he likes, and they happen to overlap a lot with models that I like. He's a particular fan of REBT, which I like, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. I'm a fan of that. William Glasser's choice theory, he makes use of. I think there's a lot of value in choice theory. He likes transactional analysis, which I've never really got into myself. So there's that in the mix. Those are big ones for him. So there's things that like really overlap and resonate for me. It's good, sensible, practical stuff on running a session well. I think just basically anybody that's doing change work, coaching, anything, I would strongly recommend checking out that book, Impact Therapy by Ed Jacobs.
So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope at least one of those was new to you and gave you something to think about. And in the next episode, we'll continue digging into more of James' influences. We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions or thoughts, you could reach us at changeworkingpod@gmail.com. See you next time.
Changeworking is produced by Ruckus Sky. For information on training, go to clientshifts.com.